Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Unleashing Potentials podcast. Today's special guest is Harris. Harris, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's gloomy here. I love that word.
Yes.
It's gloomy and rainy here and cold.
Yeah,
But
do you know what? We've had a slightly better day here in England. It's been light, still cloudy, but not too bad. But it's
yeah,
definitely cold now. It's like 3 degrees at night, centigrade, which is like
yeah.
36 Fahrenheit, I think,
Oh, okay. Oh,
if
not bad.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you where you're tuning in from. You just told us.
Yeah, England.
In
England, in it.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on today.
You're welcome. So to start, Harris, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Harris Eddie Hill. I'm non-binary, which means I don't fit the boy or the girl box, and I use they, them pronouns. Those seem to be the easiest ones. And I founded this year the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing. I used to work in the NHS, which is our national healthcare service here in the UK. And everything I was helping people with, whether it was diabetes or managing chronic conditions, talking about their relationship with food if they wanted to address that. The thing that underpinned everything that we talked about was childhood trauma, and it's part of my own story, recovering from childhood trauma and sexual trauma as well. And I started to help people. I was already trained as a coach, but I hadn't specialized yet. And after everything that I saw, and that even those patients I was working with in healthcare who knew that they had trauma and were looking for solutions from the medical system, what was available was not ideal, and the waiting lists are very long. And I was like, it's criminal. We shouldn't be waiting this long. It was part of my story as well, that for 20 years I lived with simple PTSD, recovered from that very quickly. Happy to go into detail in a bit about that if you want to. And then a couple of years later, I had a breakdown again. So I went back to my practitioner, and she said, yeah, you've got complex PTSD as well. And she had since trained in managing and treating complex PTSD. So I was like, oh, it was a bit of a surprise. Like, it made sense. It made me feel like I wasn't imagining things and that there was a real problem here. But at the same time, it was a bit of a hard pill to swallow. So yeah, all of that culminated into doing this work that I'm doing this year, and I've started working with people one-to-one and setting up group programs that I haven't started yet. But yeah, it's just been really exciting, and it's really become obvious how many people need this and just how common childhood trauma really is.
Yes, you're right. It's too common. And we normalize the dysfunction of trauma, especially childhood trauma. Some of us may think because it happened in our childhood, we're adults now, it doesn't impact us anymore, which is not
Yes.
accurate, right?
No, it's not accurate.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think as well, a lot of people have it and don't know that they even have it.
Yeah, you're right. What are some signs that you would say people exhibit that they have it and don't know?
Okay. So there's quite a few different things. One of them's people pleasing, perfectionism. Um, there's a lot around struggling to say no, not expressing your feelings easily in front of other people. I've got friends who wouldn't think twice. If they needed to cry, they'd just do it. And a younger version of me would have found that very difficult for me to do. And it shows up a lot in how we do relationships. So for a lot of people, they might have a very good talent at picking the worst possible people, and that used to be me. And it's not, I'm not victim blaming here. I'm not saying that it was intentional or that you invite the things that happen to you. I'm not saying that, but it's more that your body is most familiar often in those situations with relationships that are dysfunctional, because that was what was modeled to you. Even if your parents were happy together, it might just be that their dynamic was less than ideal or healthy, or that there was some unaddressed problems there, unaddressed traumas and stuff. It doesn't mean that you've necessarily come from you know, a home with only one parent, or, you know, like, what I'm saying is dysfunction can look like anything. Anybody can come from dysfunction. And then the other side of that coin of finding lots of dysfunctional relationships is not doing relationships at all. I've heard from people saying like, oh, I don't have that problem. I don't date rubbish people because I don't date anyone. And I'm like, yeah, that's also a trauma response for a lot of, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. You know, for some people, relationships just aren't a thing. Like, we have you know, obviously I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I've come across many people who don't experience romantic attraction or sexual attraction and things like that. So if they do relationships, they might do it in a particular way, or not at all. And that's totally valid. But I see a lot of people who've survived trauma who avoid relationships because either they've had enough of the bad ones, or the threat of them ending up in a relationship like the ones they grew up witnessing is worse than the prospect of being alone when they secretly don't want to be.
I feel that you're speaking to me.
It's so common though.
Holy
it's so
crap,
common.
what did I get myself into?
Sorry.
Wow. Yeah, it describes me. I'm just being honest, right? Like, I suck at picking the proper relation. There's no proper one, but I don't know how to do it properly. It wasn't modeled to me. My dad was like just very dysfunction house. So as an adult, I don't understand the point of relationships. I know that people get together, they have kids, married, and blah blah blah, but the in-between gap, I don't get it. And I avoid it. I do stay away from it. I'm single, people, and I'm not looking to fish. No, no, no. I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Can you take us back to your childhood and what happened?
Yeah, so I think this is the tricky part, and this is one of the reasons that a lot of people don't know they have childhood trauma, is because if you gave them one single example of a thing that happened one time, people will either be a bit like, well, it was a bit odd, but it's not that big of a deal, or they wouldn't get it at all. Like, and I think that's the thing, is that the childhood trauma, complex PTSD in general, is kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like, one little cut on its own, you're like, well, that's no big deal, you know, you don't even need a plaster, a band-aid for that. Like, it's fine. But when it turns out you've got thousands of them, you're like, oh yeah, that I see now that that's quite a big deal. So it was all of these little things that happened, and also a huge amount of complex trauma and childhood trauma are the things that didn't happen. So it's the number of times that the parents didn't show up for you, didn't allow you to express your feelings, didn't allow you to be yourself. It's so many different things, and it all kind of comes together. So when people say, you know, nothing bad happened in my childhood, but when I think about it, I feel sad. That's it. You know, it's not a particular thing. Obviously, you know, on the TV we see sort of adverts for, you know, childline, you know, helplines and stuff if a child is in real physical danger, and obviously that is also part of the story. But actually, for most of us, that's not how it goes. You know, for a lot of us, we're from families where there might not necessarily be any violence or shouting. There might not necessarily be any substance abuse. Commonly there is, but there's a phrase that I've laughed about with friends close to me before, that if you're middle class, it's not alcoholism, it's just good taste. So it's this idea, you know, it's this idea that if it's good beer and it's good wine and it's you know, posh brandy, then it's not alcoholism. It's you're just indulging in things that are appropriate to your station or your class, which obviously is bollocks. But I don't know if I can say, I can't. Can I use bad language?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, good. Bit too late if not. But yeah, so for me it was so many different things. If I was going to have any emotion, it had to be a positive emotion, because one of my parents finds difficult emotions difficult because they also never had any support around their difficult emotions, and seeing that for them was distressing, and so they would react in a very controlling way that was very harmful, very toxic, and actually terrifying. So there was a thing around not being able to have a full range of emotions and having to kind of choose between my emotional safety and my own feelings. And obviously for a lot of us, when we're children, we rely on those adults, so the only choice really is to cut off our emotions or deal with them in a different way. That's where you get things like addictions happening, numbing out. Some people will often internalize that and control their eating and might have eating disorders. There's all kinds of different things that will come out as a result of not being in an environment where you can have a full range of emotions. So that was one thing. Another message that I got, even though it was never explicitly said, was that my performance academically was more important than my mental health and what I needed. And it wasn't enough to be normal. I had to be extraordinary. And whilst it is true that I did need a lot of stimulation, because, you know, to some extent I would have been a gifted kid, actually a lot of the things that I was forced to do I didn't want to do. There were and also the thing is, I'm also autistic and ADHD, so for me to do a full day at school with noise and other children and being expected to do things all the time, and then be shoved into an after school activity almost every day of the week afterwards, was really hard going. And I remember the days that we would go and do piano lessons after school, and sometimes my mum would have to physically drag us from the car to my godmother's house. And we just really didn't want to go. And we were big kids as well. I was 5'11" by the time I was 11 years old. And you know, we were very big kids, and she would have to be kind of dragging us to the front door to get us to go, because we really didn't want to go. And it wasn't that we couldn't do it, but it was just such high demand, and it sort of they didn't care what the expense was of them putting us through that. I think my sister, she developed an incredible coping mechanism where she was very good at crying about things and pulling on people's heartstrings. And I remember looking at her as a child and like, that's so impressive. I wish that I could do that. She would often get her needs met by crying, not all the time. And it's not to say that she wasn't, you know, but sometimes she would say things and do things, and I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. So, and I remember whilst I was going through my treatment for my complex trauma, I started having memories. And I remember during this time, I said to one of my best friends, I've got complex trauma. I've just found this out and I'm working through it now. She was like, right. She said, I really believe you. I'm not saying I don't believe you, but I don't have any tangible idea of what it was that you dealt with. And I found it really hard. I was like, well, it was just off. I don't know what else to say. I don't have any examples. And since I've gone through that, I've started to have these memories of different things. And I'm like, oh, I've remembered another thing. And I'll tell her and she'll be like, Jesus Christ, that's really bad. And I'm like, yeah, I think it is. But, you know, so I remember one of them was that we did swimming after school on a Monday, and I was expected to do all my certificates in swimming, all of the, you know, different things. And when I was just before my 12th birthday, I started my periods, and I was told initially, you're not allowed to use tampons because that's for grown-ups. So I was like, okay, fine. But then the moment they realized it was going to interfere with my swimming, they were like, no, you have to use them. Actually, we've changed our minds. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And so I put my foot down and I said no, which I didn't often feel empowered enough to do, but on that occasion I did. So I was told, well, if you're refusing, then you have to go up to your teacher in front of the whole class, the swimming class, and tell them exactly why you're not swimming.
Oh, wow.
So I was punished and publicly humiliated for not doing as I was told. And I don't regret it. You know, I didn't take it back. I wasn't, in that instance, I wasn't being threatened, like it wasn't working. But yeah, so there's so many things. And I think it'd be so difficult to try and summarize it, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. And it's happening every day that parents want their kids to be what they are, and
Yes,
you know, not asking the child, what do they really want to do, what do they really want to become, what they want them to become. And it does cause trauma, a type of trauma that is complex to understand until that person goes through it. So I'm not going to say I know what you went through, because I don't know, but I understand, because I've gone through similar thing where expectations were set that were not mine to keep. Right. Tell me more about your podcast.
So I'm currently in the planning stages of putting a podcast together called It's Only Trauma. And this is being done with a friend of mine who is a somatics enthusiast. She's not yet teaching, but she knows a huge amount about somatics. And also one of her favorite, she's also neurodivergent, and one of her, I guess, special subjects, this is my take, not hers, is narcissism and codependency. And understanding that dynamic was one of the key things to helping me to fully recover from complex trauma, because one of the coping mechanisms that we develop as childhood trauma survivors, not all of us, but a lot of us, is codependency. And a lot of people don't know what that means. But it basically means where your sense of well-being, of self, of everything is 100% focused on other people and the people around you, because that's how you grew up and that's how you survived. And it was really essential to me. I remember when I first really started to get, very friendly with this particular friend of mine. And I said to her, I think I keep picking the same people. They're not bad anymore. Like, I wasn't dating abusers anymore, but there's still an issue. There's still an issue here, and I don't know what it's called. And anytime I've tried to talk about it in therapy or anywhere else, I'm told, like, well, it's just luck of the draw. And I'm like, no, that's not what's happening here. I know there's a dynamic at play here, and I want to know what it's called. I want to understand it. And then this friend of mine said, oh, you've got to read this book called The Human Magnet Syndrome. And after that, I was like, my whole life makes sense.
Wow.
And so she and I, over the years, have had so many conversations that I think would be so valuable for other survivors, because so many of us have dated like the wrong people or like really horrible people. And I think if there are no answers around that, then eventually you go, well, I'm just not good at this, so I'm not going to try, and I give up.
Yeah. I agree. Can you tell me more about your book, or do you have a few books or just one?
Oh, right. So, I mean, they're not to do with trauma yet. I will write my trauma book, but previously a lot of my work was around the queer community, and I've co-authored 2 books. The first one was the first ever queer business book that was ever published.
Oh, wow.
And it's called Thriving in Business Strategies for the LGBTQ+ Entrepreneur. And the second one, which came out this year in February, was called 28, and it was an anthology of 28 different authors, all of us who'd lived through Section 28, which was the UK's Don't Say Gay law in schools, basically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was from Margaret Thatcher put it in place in 1988, or maybe she didn't personally, but her government. And Scotland repealed it in 2000, and the rest of the UK repealed it in 2003. But during that time, it meant that it was illegal to mention homosexuality in any way, even if you're
Sorry.
even if you're being bullied or something, it was illegal for a teacher to even acknowledge why you were being bullied. So it was like the Wild West. It was completely unruly, and a lot of us had trauma from that as well, as you might imagine. So we wrote a book, all different pieces. I wrote about my background is intersectional rights and looking at a lot of different sort of demographics other than my own, and marginalized identities and stuff. And I wrote my piece about how silence is often used as a really effective tool for marginalizing people. When it becomes not okay to talk about something or to even name something, then naming it, even naming privilege or naming all of these things feels like an attack, because the way things are set up, it becomes taboo to even mention it or to acknowledge it out loud.
Wow, you're so right. You're right. We do use silence to, not talk about what we need to talk about.
Yeah.
And I've talked about gender equality on the podcast, and what else, about racism and all that, because it's there, but we don't want to talk about it. The people that talk about it, they get put on the side as a black sheep and the weird person, but it needs to be talked about. And I'm just so happy that you're doing that in partnership of those who needs to find their voice in their way. Where is that book available at? Is it on Amazon or?
Yeah, I think it's everywhere. It's just called 28, and the lead author was Kestrel Guyan. And yeah, I think you can get it anywhere online.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. The business book, I've still got some physical copies. I think there aren't many left in the world, but I've got some. But yeah, I think it's so odd, because I see people have such visceral reactions to things like intersectional rights and sort of acknowledging our own privileges and our own marginalizations, because it's a hard topic. But I think it also gives us access to each other and to community, and it's hard, but it's also so valuable. When one of my friends, when I took her to the book launch of the second book earlier this year, afterwards I said, how did you feel? What did you think? She said, I'm so angry that when I went to school, I missed out on all of this stuff. Like, she said, even though I'm not part of that community, like, that side of life is so important and so life-giving. And she was like, all of my queer friends, like, I wouldn't have even known that they were, and even if they were, I wouldn't have had the language to talk about it, because nobody did. And I missed out on so much of our culture, my friends' culture, and the conversations and intimacy that we could have had. And I think that's the same for everyone.
Yeah, I would say I can relate. Like, I feel angry as well, because I think people should be able to express who they are without people shaming them or telling them what they should be. In society, no matter what people are, they're going to always say, you're not good enough, change. And you change and you got to change again. But yes, that's a common feeling. Sometimes I'm angry and I can't really put words into it, because when I'm looking at people, I see people for who they are, and I'm like, I'm neutral. I love everybody, I accept everybody, And I don't find joy at all suppressing and hurting other people. I
Yeah.
love when people express who they are, whether they express it in a way that I like or don't like. It doesn't matter. That person found their voice and freedom to express themselves, and that should be honored, I think.
I agree. And I think that life is richer for it. I mean, I think about, when I worked in the NHS, I was surrounded by people of different faiths, who've come from different countries, different cultures. And it was the same when I went to school. I was surrounded by people who had many different faiths and practiced in their own different ways, and life was so much richer for it. It was when I'm in a culture or an environment that's very homologous, hang on, what's the word? Homogenous, that's the one, I think. I feel, and particularly someone who myself is, quite diverse, I find it quite uncomfortable and I feel quite unsafe, interestingly. And I think as well, like I've seen a lot of this kind of white supremacy and whitewashing happen within my own family, because my mum's mum was from India. She came over when she was 9 years old. And they were kind of coached by she and her sisters were coached by their parents to deny their Asianness, their brownness, and to really take on the English culture and forget everything else. And I think that then kind of conditioned all of the kind of descendants to also deny it and also be critical of other people and their non-whiteness or their non-Britishness. And as a result, I think a lot of those people from that side of family then attracted partners who would join in on that kind of whitewashing and that being critical, and as a result it's odd that I'm from a mixed family where there's so much white supremacy at the same time.
And yeah, I honor you for talking about it, because those are not easy topics to talk about. I was adopted from Haiti by a Canadian family, and when I came, it happens all the time with adoptees, all right? They were trying to change my culture and who I am. I'm lucky I was the oldest and I remember more and I still speak my language. But I remember for my cousin, her pictures of families were ripped, couldn't speak the language, wasn't allowed to, not couldn't, wasn't allowed to, and was just trying to strip what made me who I am. And I rebelled, and that's why I'm the outsider and I love it. Right? And it's important to embrace everyone for who they are. Yeah. Tell me more about Center for Childhood Trauma Healing.
So at the moment it's a metaphorical center. I operate online, so I could potentially work with anyone anywhere. And the reason that I set it up, obviously, it's partly to do the work that I'm really passionate about, that I've talked about already, but also it's to educate people about what trauma healing really is. Because whenever we talk about mental health in the West, the first people we think of are therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. There's nothing wrong with that, and they have a very important role. But as with all things in life, no one professional, no one person has the monopoly on all things to do with that particular niche. And I think that's really good and important, because we are social beings and we're meant to live together and to love each other and heal each other. And no one person, I think, should ever have the audacity to think that they hold the key for that. And I know that there are a lot of folks out there in those professions who don't profess to really have the monopoly, but yet often how they've been trained and how they speak about their profession doesn't really leave room for anything else. And I feel that I'm very much the middle man / person. And because so many of the people who come to me have already been in therapy for a long time, and they're like, I know how to talk about my problems, I'm self-aware, blah, blah, blah. But I want to feel not this anymore. I want to feel good. I want to be done with this.
Mhm.
And when I tell them, well, actually, a lot of that stuff can be processed fairly quickly, they either look at me like I'm mad, or they think that I'm trying to pull a fast one, that I'm trying to kind of, sell them air or something. I don't know. And the thing is that I'm really passionate about teaching people about trauma processing, which is not the same as trauma therapy. And I think it's really important to make that distinction, because yes, they're both really important. And I will never tell somebody, or don't go to therapy. Excuse me. But what I want people to understand, and this was like such a life-changing thing for me, which is that to become self-aware and all of that stuff is such an important part of the journey. But once you're self-aware and you've kind of put all the strategies in place that you even have the energy for, then what's next? Because you can't leave. I don't think it's right to leave people living that way. And it was purely by chance that I found someone after living with PTSD for nearly 20 years, that I found someone. I went to talk to her about something totally different. And she said, right, and what else what do you want to do about your PTSD? And I was like, well, I handle it as well as I can. At that point, I had asked so many people for help, and they all looked at me like, well, what do you want me to do about it? And she said, do you want to get rid of it? And I said, I didn't even know that was possible. Everyone that I've spoken to has told me it's not possible. And she was like, well, it is. And they were wrong to give you any advice or reaction when they clearly don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. So at that point I was desperate, and I was like, well, I'll give it a go. And I didn't think it would work. I didn't think it wouldn't work. I was just willing to try it. And my PTSD, which was so severe, was gone in like 2 hours.
Wow.
And I was like, this is madness. And once obviously I trained then, and I understood actually how simple this thing is. It's not easy, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of tissues involved. It's it's hard going. It's not an easy thing to do, but at the same time, it's not something that should take you years. I know some people have been going to the same therapist for 3, 5, 10 years because they've got trauma, and I'm like, at what point is this person going to stop taking your money and actually help you to move on to the next part? And don't get me wrong, people with, sort of like borderline personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, that's a very specialized thing, and there is help for that, but that's not necessarily what I do. But to tell somebody that this is what you've got for the rest of your life and there's nothing you can do about it, I think is morally really wrong.
Yeah.
We can't make guarantees. I can't guarantee anybody, but to say that there's nothing you can do about it is not, it's wrong. It's a lie. And so it's really important to me that I want to educate other survivors of trauma, particularly of complex trauma, but any trauma, that actually what you need is trauma processing. And it's any practice that helps you to give an ending to that trauma so that your brain can finally process it and put it in your long-term memory or whatever, like anything else, like what you had for breakfast on your 5th birthday or whatever. It just becomes a fact. It no longer holds lots of emotion and trauma. You don't get flashbacks anymore. It just becomes history, and that's it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I I have trauma, and I have complex PTSD, and it's not easy. It's hard. And I've been told that, by doctors, there's nothing they can do. And then recently with chronic pain, I live with it every single day. People can't tell, but it's torture. Again, there's nothing we can do, right? And I love that you come in between to let people know that there's a process to this. And I don't think I've heard it put that way. I've heard of the word process, but not really connecting with processing trauma, which is so important. I think I'll check your website after this, but just to see
Well,
if I do it. I want to hear more.
yeah, I've got a webinar that I recorded recently, which will be going up on my website very soon, hopefully this week, providing that I've got enough time. And it talks all about kind of what that's like and how it works and things like that. But to give you a snippet now, when I had my simple PTSD treated, the one that was gone in 2 hours. So just the headlines, I won't give any horrible details or anything, but I had sexual trauma. The first instance I was about 10. The second one was with a boyfriend in my teens, and the third time was when I was 26 on a first date. So all of those were severe incidents. And the very first one, to process that, all we did was that in this session, we went back. I went as my current self, or myself at that age, and we went back to see my younger self the morning after that very first incident, and we had this amazing conversation with my younger self. My practitioner at the time was doing some tapping, some EFT on me, which is popular. Some people really get on with that. But the thing that really happened that was like so profound for me was that this conversation took place, and it was all the stuff I didn't know that I needed at that age. I was able to come in as the adult and say, what happened isn't normal. That's not supposed to happen. You don't have to suffer this. It's not a requirement of you, you know. It wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything to invite this. And we had this conversation. Little me had questions. I can't remember all of it now. But it was, you know, and I cried a lot. There was a massive release. But the important thing was I was not triggered. We weren't talking about the actual thing that happened. It was me comforting my little self. And that in itself was so bloody powerful. Like, it was absolutely life-changing. And at the end of that, we then took little me and put them in like a safe, I don't know if it was a garden or something, but in a safe environment. We were like, this memory is now closed. Thank you for guarding it. It's finished. And I must have used half a box of tissues because I'm not a graceful crier. There's lots of snot and tears involved. But off the back of that, I was exhausted. But since then, I have never been triggered again. I haven't had a flashback, nothing. I have been, I've talked to folks who I know as adults who've since gone to prison or been accused of similar things. And I experienced that as a moral adult and not as a victim. And that difference has been life-changing. And then from then on, all of the other things, all of the treatment I had around complex trauma was very similar. We were working out together what happened to your brain when you went through this stuff, and what does it need in order to move on and finish. What needs to be expressed? What experience do we give the brain in order to let it finish those things?
Yeah.
So to me, it's there is skill in it, but I don't think that it's rocket science. I don't think that there should be the level of skepticism that there is. I do think we need to be responsible and make sure the people we're working with are insured and have their criminal checks and have good testimonials. But beyond that, I think that this type of work needs to be trusted and utilized more, because otherwise people are going to be stuck forever talking about their problems and never getting the opportunity and the chance to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. And with me, I just took matters into my own hands, because I've been going through therapy for years and years and years and years. And it's not that they're not good at what they do. I felt there was a void or emptiness there was no light shining into it. I was just always brought back to the dark moments, not what I wanted to do to bring those traumas to the surface to deal with them. So I don't know. I paint, I draw, I started a podcast. When I'm podcasting, that's my wings. And I carry people on that journey with me, and I love it. But yeah, I had to, I'm like, that's it. Thank you for your help.
Yeah.
Helping. But yeah, yeah. Oh, trauma is so complex. That sounds like pretty hard, deep work that you did. I'm still petrified to do inner child work because
Mm,
the little girl in me is so angry, and I try to suppress her so she doesn't explode, so she doesn't get the adult me in trouble. But I think we're slowly making friends, and it's like I can see her, but she's between so many walls. I can kind of still hear her and see her, but there isn't that connection yet because I'm scared.
mm.
I'm scared of what may come out.
It's so normal to be scared, but I think, and also I've had folks say to me so many times, like, oh, I should have done this earlier, or I've let myself down, or as an adult, there were so many times when I didn't listen to little me, and I've really heard them saying stuff, and I've let them down repeatedly, and they have so many regrets. But the thing is that the fact that people haven't dealt with things yet, there's a really valid reason, and I don't think that it's wrong. I don't think that you're doing anything wrong to not do things sooner. I
Mhm,
think that, and there's so much self-compassion needed here, because
mhm,
a traumatized brain is always looking for a perpetrator or a threat.
mhm,
And I think because we're in that habit of doing that, and that's one of the things that kept us alive, you know, it's an important mechanism,
mhm,
is that as adults we start to feel that every fault or everything we see as being less than ideal is immediately a threat, and that's not always the case.
mhm,
And it also means that we're often too harsh on ourselves, because
mhm,
in a traumatized brain, there's so often little space for the gray areas, you know, for the possibility of, like, maybe this wasn't ideal, but actually maybe it's okay, it's not the end of the world. Maybe because I didn't do this thing, I'm not a monster. Maybe because I did this thing, that was just all I knew to do at the time.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And you're right. I feel like I need to love myself as the adult first. It's like going backward, if that makes sense. Instead of making
Yeah.
a massive jump to the little girl, I'm just break by break as an adult, I'm going back through the years. I don't know if I don't know, people process that differently. I feel that it's been working for me to go back because I
Yeah.
didn't always love the adult that you're looking at. If I don't love that person that I am, how can I love me as a little broken, hurt girl?
Yes.
Mhm,
Yes, and a lot of the work that I do with people, the almost like mostly the beginning half of the work that I do with people is around emotional integration,
mhm,
which means if you're angry, how do we start to have a healthy relationship with anger? Because
mhm,
and that can be scary when our we have a connotation in our brain that anger means violence, and they're two very different things.
mhm, mhm,
So there's a lot of work around emotional integration. What are the parts of myself that I've cut off? And once you become a bit more of a solid adult, with you've kind of reclaimed all the bits that were
mhm,
too expensive to have in the past,
mhm,
you're then able, like you say, to go back to that younger self and to be a bit more integrated, a bit more whole, a bit more solid, a bit more stable.
mhm.
Because I think it's right, you know, your intuition around this is very good, and actually a lot of people's are, they just haven't learned to sit quite yet.
Yeah.
But that, you know, if you turn up as a still feeling wobbly and try to comfort your inner child, like even just that meeting of you now and the inner child is
Hmm.
when I first heard about that kind of work, I thought, oh, it just sounds very fluffy and like total nonsense. And the first time I did it, I couldn't stop crying. um and you know, but you can't turn up to comfort a child when you yourself are not regulated.
Mm,
That's a hard thing to do. It's not that you don't cry and you're not allowed to cry, but I think you do have to be able to feel that, like the adult in that situation. So yeah,
yeah.
trust your intuition. I think you're exactly right.
Thank you. Do you think the healthcare system is different where you are than where I am, most likely? Do you think the government and healthcare systems and agencies are doing enough to combat and help those struggling with PTSD and trauma?
No, in short, not at all, because there's so many different aspects that feed into this, and I'm aware that we don't have loads of time, so I will give you the headlines. The first thing is that a medical system will not touch anything that hasn't got loads of studies behind it, and B, something that they can understand from a medical logical point. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do with mental health, because emotions are not logical. I think that emotional work is almost antithetical. It's like it's in the opposite of medical thought and training. And the other thing, and some people have said this, and I try to stay on the side of optimism and of thinking the best, but quite a few people have said, if this trauma work was more popular, would that not have a negative effect on some of the therapy industry in terms of revenue? Because a few people have suggested, and this is not my opinion, like I wouldn't want to offer an opinion, but quite a few people have said to me, it's not financially as viable to treat somebody's trauma than it is to give them therapy about it for years.
Wow.
And obviously I live in a country where healthcare is free at the point of service, so it's not quite the same here, but I definitely think that medical folks and institutions have a bit of a stick up their butts, because it's not something they easily understand.
Yeah, they go by the book.
So
yeah, I find
yeah,
that
and it's just, yeah, and by their training, I think they don't get it. Like, no, obviously I'm generalizing here, and there are going to be loads of people who don't fit this, and I'm not saying it about everyone, but as an example, when I started my NHS job as a health coach, I was shadowing a GP one morning, and she had a patient come in to talk about something just very routine, and they hadn't seen each other in a while, and this patient said, oh, since I last saw you, I had an accident, I broke my ankle. And the moment she started saying, I had an accident, tears were coming to her eyes immediately. And this was something that had happened over 6 months previous. And I noticed this. And at the end, the doctor, once the patient had left, the doctor said, did you notice anything? I said, she still has a huge emotional charge around her breaking her ankle. I think that, I'd love to work with her and actually help her to process that. And she said, that is so observant of you. And I was like, but she was fucking crying. I was like, I don't think that's any, I don't think there's any wizardry to this, really. I just think that I noticed that she was crying and she was upset when she talked about something, which suggests that it's an emotional topic for her. And I don't think that I find it very kind of funny, but also very frustrating that folks who consider themselves, kind of the overlords of healthcare are missing half of the picture, which is emotional well-being.
Yeah, you're right. I've noticed that as a excuse me, as a client and as a patient, and I just, over time, I just don't talk anymore because I'm not being heard.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not hurting, I don't need the help, but they're not listening. So I talk to people who actually can observe and listen to what I have to say, and I know I'm not alone. Many people want people to pay attention and to listen.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about LGBTQ?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I used to do a lot of advocacy around this, and I stopped doing it because I got burnt out, because actually I found that the majority of people taking up my time and energy were people who had a big reaction to people like me. And in the end, I was like, I was interviewing a trans author called Juno Roche a few years ago, and she said, queer people aren't fucked up. And I was like, that's true, actually. And no one, you know, it wasn't that I believed any different. It was just that by the time that Juno had said this, I was like, it just planted this seed in me that I was like, actually, we're fine. Like, we're just people going about our business. You know, I'm non-binary, as I mentioned at the beginning, which means I don't fit the girl or the boy box. And for me personally, you know, and non-binary is an umbrella term. People have all sorts of different experiences within this community. But for me personally, I feel very genderless. And when people try to apply a gender to me, it feels, I get the same reaction as, you know, like when someone scrapes a chair, or like someone like scrapes a blackboard with their fingers, or do you know what I mean? It's like that, that sensation goes through my body, and I'm like, oh God, no, that's totally wrong. And then I'm also, I guess, pansexual. It's a little bit more complicated than that, I suppose, but the bottom line is that when it comes to gender, or what you know, sex somebody is, and someone I'm dating, I just don't care. I don't really, I feel like it's such a unimportant I guess difference to me. It's like if someone was like, oh, would you only date someone with blue or brown eyes? And I'm like, I don't give a shit. And they're like, but you must have a preference. And I'm like, it just doesn't matter. The person that I connect to, if I love them, you know, that kind of thing, then that's important. You know, what plumbing they have, I couldn't I just don't care. It's not important. And to me, it's a strange concept, not a wrong one, nothing wrong with it, but it's a strange concept that people do have preferences, and I totally respect it. But I guess I extend the same grace to them that I guess they do to me, and that, you know, we're having very different experiences, and that's totally okay. And I think with the gender thing as well, I attract people of all different kinds, and I think because they know that I'm open-minded, I don't judge it, you know, similarly to you, I take people as they come, and I think that's cool. And actually, in the positive, I celebrate difference. And I think that when people learn to embrace their differences, they become happier people, they become more loving people, they become better at their work, you know, or their relationships. Just everything improves when people get to be themselves. Everything improves. And I think also it gives other people license to be themselves. And I think, you know, I know a lot of straight people, cisgender, meaning not transgender. So if you agree, if when you were born the doctor said it's a boy or a girl, and you think, yeah, that's about right, then you're cisgender. It's just the opposite of transgender. But, you know, I know a lot of straight and cisgender people who benefit hugely from me being around and me being happy, because I think once you've thrown the rule book out of the window because one part of your identity doesn't fit, then it helps you to start unpicking everything else. And it then means that you become better at seeing things for what they are, and for seeing the moments that people are conforming for the sake of conforming. It's when you start to question systems that actually aren't very good for most of us. And there's a huge amount of liberation that comes with this. And I think that the number one reason that people have a bad reaction to this is because that level of liberation is terrifying to them. And to them, it represents harm and the dissolution of all of the kind of covenants and the systems that they think are sacred and safe. So, you know, when people have a big reaction to me, I can see very clearly where it's coming from. But, you know, I think when you're a marginalized identity, and it's different, you know, I even get funny looks sometimes just going to the toilet in a public place, and people are like squinting at me like, are you definitely in the right room, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, all these different things. So I just think it's, when you're part of that marginalized identity, I think it's hard to continue being the spokesperson for it, because
yeah.
it's never ending. And I think when you're part of a marginalized identity, to find community and just get to exist and be yourself, I think that in itself is,
Mhm.
it needs to be enough, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. Oh, wow. I love how you explain it. It makes so much sense. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
also people programmed, as kids, of what they should believe, and I was programmed, and I had to deprogram myself and deconstruct what was the truth on that, what was aligning to my soul on that, and it's true freedom. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, my 4-year-old, well, my niece she'll be 4 on Saturday this week,
Mm.
and I think it was last year, my sister said to her, well, we talk about Harris as a they them, not a she or a he. And she was like, oh, she was like, mummy, why do some people feel like a girl or not a boy? And my sister was like, I don't know, do you want to ask Harris? And she's like, yeah, okay. And then she thought about it. Her favorite movie is Frozen, and
Mhm.
she decided that she was like, all of the characters are boys or girls except Olaf the snowman. She thinks that Olaf the snowman is a they them, and that
Wow.
Olaf the snowman is non-binary representation to her.
That's so cool. Yeah.
But it's so simple. We've never really had a conversation about it. It was simple. She was like, oh, some people just feel differently about that, and then that was it. We've not had any more conversation about it. It's just a fact, and she
Mhm.
doesn't care and I don't care, and we get on with it. We share a love for childish humor, and I teach her lots of naughty phrases like smelly poo bum, that she thinks is absolutely like the epitome of naughtiness and cheekiness. So,
Mm.
we bond over the bigger stuff, the more important things like wee face and
Yeah.
other things like that.
Yeah, I love kids because they're so open-minded and aware and accepting of everything and everybody. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Before we wrap up, 2 questions. The first one
Mhm.
is, what is the meaning of life for you?
I think everything comes down to love and purpose.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Where can my listeners find you and support your work?
So my website is the best place. It's got all of my social media links and all of my freebies and stuff on there. And it's MX, which is mxharrishill.com.
Mhm.
So there's a free short curriculum
Mhm.
on there for survivors of childhood trauma who want to have healthier relationships. There's like 4 audiobooks listed on there.
Mm.
There's some other bits on there that you can access that are free. As I mentioned, the webinar that all about trauma healing is going up very soon. And there's other bits and pieces on there, resources and books and different things. So,
Oh, Harris, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you sharing your story and helping all of us heal in so many beautiful ways. Thank you.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Bernadette. It's a real privilege to be here.
You're welcome.